I spent 32 years working as a school secretary, saved every penny to buy a house in my own name. And when my arthritis finally forced me into retirement, my daughter looked me straight in the eye and said I was being dramatic about needing family support. What she didn't realize was that the beautiful Victorian home she would been living in rent-free still belonged to me. And when that foreclosure notice arrived at her doorstep, her whole world came tumbling down. But trust me, that was only the beginning of what I discovered next. Before we dive into today's story, please hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these real-life experiences. Also, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. Now, let's get into this incredible story. My name is Dolores Sullivan. I am 71 years old, and the biggest mistake I ever made was believing that unconditional love meant accepting unconditional disrespect. It all started on a cold February morning, the kind where your joints ache before you even get out of bed, and you find yourself thinking about your grown child, like she is still 8 years old, asking you to braid her hair for school picture day. Not a 38-year-old woman living in your house while treating you like a stranger she would rather avoid. I had just finished making my famous apple cinnamon scones. The ones Rebecca used to beg me to pack in her lunchbox when she was having trouble with the mean girls in middle school. She always said they made everything better, like magic in a paper bag. So I wrapped them carefully in my good tea towel, grabbed my purse, and drove the 12 minutes across town with that foolish smile on my face that I get when I pretend not to notice she has been ignoring my phone calls for 2 whole weeks. The house, my house, looked different somehow. The front garden had been completely redone with expensive stone pavers and those modern sculptural plants that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Definitely Nick's influence, since he has always got to make everything look like it belongs in one of those home design magazines. As I approached the front door, I could hear voices drifting from the screened-in back porch, champagne glasses clinking together, and a woman's voice I didn't recognize saying, "Oh, Nick, you are absolutely hilarious." Then I heard Rebecca's voice, my own daughter's voice, slice right through my heart like a cold blade. "My mother. Please, she is just retired, not invalid. She needs to stop acting like I am responsible for entertaining her loneliness." The world stopped moving. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stand there on the porch I used to sweep every Saturday morning, holding those warm scones in my trembling hands and realizing I wasn't wanted in the home I would spent 3 decades paying for. Someone turned up jazz music in the background. The unknown woman's laughter got louder and more theatrical. I backed away carefully, never knocked, never announced myself, just set those scones on the wicker table by the door like some pitiful offering from a woman nobody cared to see. Then walked back to my sedan with my chest feeling like it was caving in on itself. I sat in the driver's seat for several minutes with my hands gripping the steering wheel, blinking back the burning sensation behind my eyes, and that is when I noticed the manila envelope I would tossed onto the passenger seat yesterday after cleaning out my file cabinet. Inside it, carefully preserved and notarized, was the property deed to the house they were celebrating in. A house that belonged entirely to me, purchased with my name, my credit, and my decades of overtime pay from the school district. That evening, I didn't eat dinner. I heated up a can of tomato soup, sat in my cramped studio apartment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, and let one thought circle through my mind like a bird of prey. If they think I am just some pathetic old woman who should be grateful to be ignored, they have no idea what storm is coming their way. I woke up the next morning with the bitter taste of yesterday still coating my tongue. And it wasn't from the canned soup. I kept replaying Rebecca's words, hearing her dismiss me, like I was some burdensome obligation interfering with her social life. And for a long time I just sat on the edge of my narrow bed, staring at my fuzzy slippers like I didn't recognize the person wearing them. My tiny studio felt smaller than usual, not because of the space, but because I would never felt so completely alone, not even when I lost my husband Robert in that factory accident 28 years ago. After I made a cup of instant coffee because I cannot afford those expensive coffee machines like Nick uses, I opened my banking app and stared at the number. $287.63 to last me until my next Social Security deposit. And that is before my prescription costs hit. It is amazing how quickly your dignity gets quiet when you realize you cannot even afford fresh fruit. But the anger from last night was still burning bright in my chest. In fact, it was getting stronger. I scrolled through old text messages from Rebecca, going back months, where she promised to help out more once she got settled in her new job. But somehow, she never got settled enough to actually help me. Then, just as I was debating whether to call her or just spend the day crying, my phone chimed with a text from Nick. "Hey Dolores, could you maybe call before stopping by? It makes Rebecca anxious when you show up unannounced." Thanks. No heart, no warmth, just that cold thanks, like I was some bothersome neighbor instead of the woman who raised the woman he married. I stared at that message, took a slow breath, and deleted it without responding. Then I stood up, walked to my kitchen junk drawer, and pulled out a rubber band holding together a stack of business cards from people I hadn't contacted in years. I found Harold Brennan, real estate agent, who helped Robert and me purchase that house back in 1991 when interest rates were astronomical. I dialed his number without allowing myself to second guess. "Harold, this is Dolores Sullivan. Do you remember me?" He did. Said it had been way too long. I told him I had a property I wanted to discuss selling. He asked if I was certain, mentioned that the market was unpredictable right now. I told him I wasn't calling for market advice. I was calling because I legally own a house my daughter and son-in-law think belongs to them, and I want them evicted. There was a long pause, then a quiet whistle. "I will be at your place tomorrow morning." After I hung up, I walked back to my living room, looked around at the second-hand furniture and yellowed light fixtures, and felt a strange peace settle in my bones. They think I am weak, but what they don't understand is I have been surviving challenges since long before they knew what a mortgage payment was. I raised Rebecca completely alone after Robert died, worked double shifts during budget cuts and teacher strikes, gave up relationships, vacations, rest, everything for her. And now I am finished being invisible. Harold arrived punctually the next morning, still wearing the same style of brown leather shoes and oversized glasses he would worn in the 90s, though his hair had gone completely silver and his waistline had expanded somewhat. But he greeted me like no time had passed and shook my hand like I was still the determined young widow who would once purchased her first home with 25% down and an iron will. I made us both coffee, mine in a chipped mug, his in the nicest cup I owned, and we sat at my small dinette while I retrieved the folder I would kept stored in my bedroom closet, the one containing the deed, the closing documents, and every property tax bill from the last 31 years, all bearing my name exclusively. Harold took his time examining the paperwork, nodding thoughtfully, then looked surprised when he saw Rebecca and Nick's names appeared nowhere on any document. "You never transferred ownership?" he asked, seeming genuinely shocked. I shook my head firmly. Never even considered it. I allowed them to live there after Rebecca lost her teaching position and claimed they just needed 18 months to get financially stable. Harold released a breath like he was suppressing amazement. "Dolores, you have more control here than you realize." That statement hit me powerfully. Not because it was news, but because for the first time in years, someone actually acknowledged it out loud. We discussed numbers, market valuations, and timeline possibilities. But I made one thing absolutely clear. I didn't want a large for sale sign in the front yard, no open houses with balloons and folding chairs. I wanted it handled quietly, through private listing, no unnecessary drama. Harold understood completely, said he could contact several investment buyers, or perhaps someone seeking a rental property, and I agreed, sipping my lukewarm coffee while my hands shook slightly under the table. I asked if there might be any legal complications, and he assured me there wouldn't be. "You are the sole name on the title. It is your property, period." But then he paused and wondered if Rebecca or Nick might challenge it out of vindictiveness, try to contest it legally or delay the process. And that is when something cold settled in my stomach, because instinctively I knew they would try. I thanked Harold, walked him to the door, and as soon as it closed behind him, I stood in my silent apartment for a long moment before retrieving a dusty accordion file from the top shelf of my bedroom closet. The one where I kept every mortgage statement, homeowner's insurance notice, and receipt from repairs I would paid for even after Rebecca moved in with Nick. But as I sorted through those documents, I noticed something strange. A photocopied refinancing application from 2019 with my name typed in messy digital font and a signature that looked wrong. My heart started pounding. The room spinning around me. I knew my own signature, like I knew my own face. This wasn't mine. My fingers began trembling as I realized what I was holding. Rebecca had attempted to refinance the house into her name without my knowledge, using a forged signature. I collapsed onto the couch hard, that fake signature burning into my vision as something fundamental shifted inside me. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. This was criminal betrayal, cold, calculated deception. They hadn't just taken my kindness for granted. They would try to steal my legal ownership of what I would sacrifice for. I picked up my phone and called the only person I trusted with legal documents, Patricia Rodriguez, a retired court clerk and old friend from the school district who used to help me understand the fine print on our union contracts. She answered immediately, and as soon as I explained what I would found, her tone shifted from friendly to razor-sharp. "Dolores," she said, "bring me everything this afternoon." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just opened a fresh manila folder, wrote "war" across the front in red ink, and started organizing copies like a woman who would finally stop waiting for her daughter to remember who sacrificed everything to raise her. I took the city bus across town to Patricia's townhouse, clutching that folder against my chest like it might disappear if I wasn't careful. When she opened the door, still wearing her reading glasses and that old Northwestern sweatshirt she practically lived in, I could tell by her expression that she was already in battle mode, the kind of focused, take-no-prisoners energy that used to reassure me when the school administration was chaotic and paperwork was overwhelming. We sat at her dining room table while she examined every page, her pen tapping against the wood in that rhythmic pattern she always made when she was concentrating. When she reached the forged signature, she muttered, "Good Lord, Dolores, this isn't just careless. This is a felony." She started marking things with a red pen, asking specific questions about dates, bank accounts, any phone calls I might have overlooked. I realized how much I would deliberately ignored over the years. All the times Rebecca deflected my questions about mail delivery, how Nick insisted on managing the utility accounts, how they suddenly had expensive electronics but still claimed they were struggling financially. Patricia laid it out plainly. If Rebecca had attempted to file a new deed or modify the mortgage using my forged signature, and if I could prove I never authorized it, not only could I evict them, but I might have grounds for criminal charges, possibly even felony prosecution. But instead of feeling victorious, I just felt nauseated. I kept wondering how we would reach this point. How did I raise someone who could look me in the eye and lie so effortlessly? Someone who used to hold my hand during thunderstorms and cry when I had my hysterectomy. Patricia told me not to get emotional, to stay strategic, so I did what I always do when overwhelmed. I made a list. 1. Verify the property's current legal status with the county recorder's office. 2. Request Rebecca's credit report to see if she would use my identity elsewhere. 3. Begin preparing formal eviction paperwork in case they didn't leave voluntarily. Harold called me that evening to report he had a serious buyer interested, a discreet investor who renovated properties, no complications, all cash, and I told him to proceed but to keep it confidential. No signs, no showings. He agreed completely. That night, I sat on my couch with a bowl of canned chili and read through Rebecca's old text messages like they were from a stranger. "Thanks for everything, Mom. I promise I will make it up to you. We will have you over for Sunday dinner soon. You are amazing. Don't know what I would do without you." Each message felt like a lie now. Then my phone buzzed with a new text from Nick. "Hey, just wondering if you could bring that space heater the next time you visit. Rebecca says you have one we could borrow. The nursery's been pretty cold." Nursery, I stared at that word, stunned. Nobody had told me they were even expecting. I didn't respond. I turned off my phone and sat there in complete silence. The kind that doesn't feel peaceful, just heavy, like a thick blanket over your face. In that moment, I knew what came next wouldn't be about fairness or reconciliation. It was about reclaiming what belonged to me before they erased me entirely from my own life. The formal notice went out 3 days later, printed in bold black letters on legal paper, hand-delivered by a process server. Harold arranged to prevent anything from getting lost or delayed. And though part of me wished I could have witnessed Rebecca's face when she opened that envelope, the other part, the exhausted, quietly furious part, just sat on my couch staring at my silent phone, waiting for the explosion I knew was coming. It didn't take long, Rebecca called. 5 times that afternoon, left 3 voicemails, and when I didn't respond, she started texting frantically. Mom, what is this? This has to be a joke, right? You cannot throw us out like this. I am literally pregnant. But I didn't answer. Not yet. I wanted the silence to stretch, to let it sink deep that I wasn't bluffing this time. That this wasn't one of those moments where I would fold after a guilt trip or hollow apology. The next day, I went over in person. Not because I owed them that consideration, but because I wanted them to see my face when I said what needed saying. The house looked exactly like it always had, but colder somehow, less like home, and more like a museum display. The kind of place people decorate for social media posts instead of actual living. Nick opened the door wearing a concerned expression, like I would interrupted something crucial. Dolores, he said, already defensive, is this about that legal notice? Rebecca says there has been some kind of mistake. I stepped past him into the hallway without asking permission, and there she was, standing in the kitchen wearing yoga clothes and no makeup, looking like a grown child caught stealing cookies. She opened her mouth, probably to spin some excuse, but I spoke first. I pulled the deed from my purse, placed it on the granite counter, and beside it, the forgery documents, highlighted and notarized courtesy of Patricia. You have 30 days to vacate, I said, calm and clear. The house has been sold. You are no longer welcome here. The room went dead silent, like every sound had been vacuumed out. Nick stared at the papers, then at me, then at Rebecca, who looked like she couldn't decide whether to scream or beg. You cannot do this, she said finally, her voice shaking. How could you do this to me, to your grandchild? I lifted my chin. You didn't even tell me you were pregnant, and you tried to steal this house with a forged signature. Don't lecture me about family obligations. Nick grabbed a baby monitor from the counter, like it might protect him from what was happening. This is crazy, he muttered, but he couldn't look at me directly. Rebecca slammed her palm on the counter. You want us on the street. Is that what you want? Over money? I shook my head slowly. Over respect. Over honesty. Over the years, I sacrificed everything for you while you laughed behind my back and treated me like some worn-out burden. I didn't wait for more arguments. I turned and walked out, the screen door slamming behind me, and as I got into my car and drove away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Not anger, not even satisfaction, but absolute clarity. I wasn't just taking back a house, I was taking back my dignity. It only took a week for the cracks to show, and this time I didn't have to imagine Rebecca's face when reality hit, because her meltdown played out on Facebook for everyone to witness. First came the self-pitying post, evicted by my own mother. Hope you can sleep at night knowing what you have done. Then, a series of photos of the house with a lengthy caption trying to rewrite the story, painting me as a heartless woman who had turned on her own blood without reason. But the comments didn't go the way she expected, because people remembered the bake sale I organized when Nick's father had his stroke, or how I used to host Christmas dinner for anyone who didn't have family nearby when Rebecca was in high school. Slowly, the narrative turned against her. Not because of anything I said, but because people knew what kind of mother I would been. Still, none of it brought me joy, not really, because even as the eviction deadline approached, I couldn't stop thinking about the baby I couldn't meet, the nursery I would never seen, the grandchild growing up in a house that used to echo with Rebecca's first words, and now felt like a battlefield covered in expensive flooring and bitter resentment. Harold kept me informed. The buyer's inspection went smoothly. The cash transfer was prepared. Closing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. But he also warned me that Rebecca might try to delay things legally or even strike back somehow. Though so far nothing had been filed in court. Then came the phone call that shook me. A law office calling to confirm I was aware of a pending petition regarding mental competency and asset management. I nearly dropped my phone because it was the kind of tactic I never imagined my own daughter would stoop to. But it was real. Rebecca had filed a claim suggesting I wasn't mentally capable of managing my property, trying to freeze the sale by alleging I was being manipulated by unscrupulous parties. I called Patricia immediately, and when she heard what had happened, her voice went ice cold. She is playing dirty now. Good, so can we. We spent the next 48 hours assembling every medical record, character reference, and legal document I possessed. And Patricia contacted a lawyer she knew from her old firm who agreed to help pro bono once he reviewed the case. The judge dismissed Rebecca's petition before it ever reached a hearing, calling it unsubstantiated and clearly retaliatory. And when I got the email confirming the dismissal, I allowed myself to cry, not from sadness, but because it was the first time in years someone had defended me without asking me to justify why I deserved it. Meanwhile, Nick left her. That information came through a mutual acquaintance who worked with my old book club. He would moved in with his parents upstate, said he couldn't handle the chaos anymore, and was tired of Rebecca blaming everyone else for her own poor choices. He intended to seek full custody once the baby was born. Rebecca tried to save face, claimed it was a temporary separation while they figured things out. But from the moving truck I spotted outside the house one morning, it clearly wasn't temporary. I didn't speak to either of them during those final days before the sale closed. I didn't offer assistance, didn't ask questions, just waited as quietly as I had when I stood on that porch with scones weeks earlier. Except now, I held the power. The silence and the knowledge that I had weathered the storm my daughter created. The house sold that Friday at 3:47 p.m. I watched the funds appear in my account in one clean electronic transfer, and just like that, the last chain tying me to the version of my life that revolved around Rebecca's needs snapped free. I didn't feel empty. I felt weightless. After the house sold and the check cleared, I didn't celebrate like some triumphant queen sitting on a throne of revenge. I didn't book a cruise or splurge on expensive dinners. I just went home, opened the junk drawer in my tiny kitchen, and pulled out an old brass key with a faded blue tag that read Unit 127. A key I hadn't touched in over 12 years because it belonged to a storage unit I would been paying for automatically, a little metal room holding the remnants of a life I would packed away after Rebecca moved into that house and told me I could finally let go of all that old stuff. I hadn't returned since the day I stored it all there. Robert's old army, footlocker, our wedding photos, Rebecca's childhood artwork, the thick envelope of canceled vacation plans, I never had the courage to throw away. But now, with the house gone and the noise of my old life finally quiet, I felt a strange urge to see what had survived all this time, like I needed evidence that not everything I would built had been lost or corrupted. The storage facility was across town near the old industrial district, gray and forgotten, like every place in the city that time had abandoned. As I turned the key and lifted the metal door, the stale air hit me like an old perfume. You almost remember, heavy with memory and dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. The boxes were still there, neatly labeled in my careful handwriting, untouched by time. I knelt down and opened the one marked Robert, pulling out a soft leather journal and the small wooden box containing his purple heart and bronze star, medals he never liked to display. For a moment, I just sat there on the cold concrete floor with my hands resting on my knees, breathing it all in, remembering how strong I used to feel before everything got tangled up in Rebecca's demands and disappointments. Then I opened a smaller box, one I didn't remember labeling so carefully, and inside was a folder stamped with travel documents, flight confirmations, hotel reservations, tour brochures for a trip Robert and I had planned to Ireland in 1994 before his accident changed everything. We were going to see the cliffs of Moher, drink whiskey in Dublin pubs, and stay in a castle like people who had all the time in the world. But life stole that from us, and I never even canceled the reservations, just shoved the papers into a box and told myself someday I would go. I sat back against the wall, holding those yellowing documents in my lap, and for the first time since this whole mess began, I didn't think about Rebecca or Nick or the grandchild I might never have the chance to meet. I thought about me, about the version of Dolores who had dreams and plans and a heart full of something other than grief and obligation. When I locked the unit and drove home, I opened my laptop, started a new browser tab, and typed flights to Dublin into the search bar. My fingers hesitating just for a moment before clicking. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't explain or justify. I just booked it, one way, paid in full with my house money. When the confirmation email arrived, I didn't cry or laugh or shout. I just sat very still, listening to the hum of my refrigerator, and let the quiet victory of choosing myself finally settle into my bones. I didn't pack much for Dublin, just a medium suitcase with comfortable walking clothes, my passport, the travel folder from the storage unit, and Robert's journal tucked between two cardigans, because I wanted a piece of him with me, even though he never got to see the Irish countryside. As the plane lifted off from O'Hare on a crisp morning that didn't feel like any beginning or ending I would known before, I looked out the window and whispered goodbye to Illinois, not with tears, but with a strange, steady calm. Like closing the door on a book I would reread too many times hoping it might end differently. The flight was peaceful, the hotel modest but charming, and for the first 3 days I barely left my room except to walk the cobblestone streets and buy fresh bread from a bakery that smelled like comfort and possibility. I wasn't there to sightsee. I was there to remember what it felt like to be a person without anchors, without guilt pulling at every decision. Somewhere between the quiet mornings and the long walks along the River Liffey, I found myself breathing deeper than I had in years, just existing like someone who had finally stepped out of the background of her own life. On the 4th day, I sat at a cafe near Trinity College sipping Irish coffee, watching 2 elderly men argue over a newspaper with such passionate joy that I laughed out loud. And that is when it hit me how long it had been since I would laughed without bracing for someone else's reaction or judgment. Later that evening, I sent one photo, just one of myself at the Guinness Storehouse, wearing a green beret with a pint in hand, and I attached it to a single email to Rebecca with the subject line retired. Not dead and no message inside, because there was nothing left to explain and no apology I needed to offer. I don't know if she replied. I didn't check. That night, I sat in my hotel room with Robert's journal open on my lap, reading his messy handwriting about his dreams for us. The places he wanted to show me, and I whispered, I made it, sweetheart, into the soft Irish night, letting the words drift somewhere I hoped he could hear them. I wasn't planning the next chapter of my life yet. I wasn't interested in plans anymore, only moments, like watching the sunset without checking the time, or falling asleep without worries screaming for attention. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel forgotten or abandoned or pushed aside. I felt free in a way that didn't need an audience or approval, just a heart still beating, a sky wide open, and a name that still belonged entirely to me. I had just returned from a morning walk through the Temple Bar district, where I would bought a hand-knit scarf from an older woman who reminded me of my grandmother, practical but warm. I was sitting by the window of my hotel room, sipping tea and letting the Dublin breeze play with my silver hair when the hotel desk clerk called to say I had mail, which surprised me because nobody knew this address except the airline and the hotel booking service. Curiosity pulled me downstairs in my slippers, puzzled until he handed me a cream-colored envelope with my full name written in neat cursive across the front, postmarked from Chicago. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Nick's, and something in my chest tightened as I climbed back upstairs with the envelope in one hand, and my thoughts spinning like autumn leaves, because the last real communication between us had been angry and final, and I would assumed I would never hear from him again. I sat back down by the window, slid my finger under the flap, and pulled out a folded sheet of hotel stationery. No cards, no photographs, just a letter written in blue ink. Every word careful as if he would rewritten it multiple times before mailing it. He said he was sorry, not just for how they would treated me, but for the years he never spoke up to Rebecca, for letting her shut me out of important moments, for not telling me about the pregnancy. He admitted he had known about the refinancing attempt, but believed Rebecca when she swore it was legal. And now that everything had collapsed, he saw her for who she really was, a woman who used manipulation to cover her insecurity and blame to mask her failures. He told me he would left her permanently, moved back with his parents in Wisconsin, gotten a job at a local bank, and most importantly, he wrote that he wanted his daughter to know where she came from, to grow up hearing stories about the woman who once worked double shifts so her daughter could go to college, about the woman who bought a house and fought for it, even when everyone told her to be grateful and quiet. Nick asked if he could keep in touch, said he wasn't asking for anything more than a chance to do right for his daughter. Once she came to this world and maybe someday rebuild something small between us if I ever felt ready. He wrote that Rebecca was struggling, had moved back with her sister, was working at a retail job, and seemed to finally understand the magnitude of what she would lost. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it on the windowsill beside my teacup. And I didn't cry, didn't rush to respond, didn't spiral into old emotions. Instead, I sat with it like you would sit with a story someone told you that wasn't yours to fix, just yours to understand. I didn't feel the need to forgive or punish him, just a quiet recognition that maybe, in some corner of the universe, there was still a thread connecting me to the future. Not through Rebecca, but through a little baby who didn't yet know how complicated people could be, how twisted love could become, or how sometimes the ones who get pushed away end up building stronger foundations out of their silence than they ever could out of empty apologies. I stayed in Dublin for almost 8 months, long enough to let the quiet reshape me, to let the rhythms of a slower life soften the edges that had grown sharp from decades of sacrifice and disappointment. When I finally felt that familiar pull, not of obligation but of readiness, I booked a return flight, not because I missed Illinois, but because I no longer feared what was waiting there. I didn't return to the same apartment, didn't pick up where I would left off, because that chapter had closed the moment I stepped off the porch with scones in hand and a property deed in my purse. Instead, I used a portion of the house sale money to buy a modest condominium in a quieter neighborhood with large windows and enough sunlight to grow tomatoes on the balcony. And I surprised myself by how little I needed to feel content. But the real moment came one snowy Thursday when I got a call from Harold, who told me that one of the investors in his network had backed out of a rental property deal and was looking to sell quickly. It turned out the property was in the very same neighborhood where my old house used to stand, and before I could stop myself, I asked him to send me the listing. It wasn't fancy, just a 3-bedroom ranch house, but something about it felt right, like a circle completing itself. And within 10 days I would bought it outright. No loans, no complications, just a wire transfer and a signed deed in my name alone. I didn't plan to live there, but I knew exactly what I would do with it. Through a property management company, I listed it at market rate with thorough tenant screening, and within a week, I had an application from someone named Rebecca Fletcher, recently divorced, looking for a place near her new job at a dental clinic. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't approve or deny the application myself. I let the management company handle it according to standard procedures. But when her lease was finalized and I saw her signature on that digital document, I sat in my new living room with a cup of tea and a smile that didn't feel cruel, just complete. Each month, like clockwork, a rent payment appears in my account under the tenant reference number, RF2847. And I don't say a word. She doesn't know I own the property, and I don't need her to. Power, I have learned, isn't always loud. Sometimes it is just choosing who gets your attention and who gets your silence. I have established a scholarship fund for single mothers returning to school. I have taken up weekly pottery classes and joined a hiking group for seniors. I have received 4 handwritten letters from Nick. He didn't intend to come back to Rebecca, but he had been there throughout her pregnancy. The little girl had finally come to this world. I haven't met her yet, and I don't know when I will. But I write back when I feel moved to, careful and calm, not chasing anything, just being present for whatever develops naturally. I have stopped apologizing for how I take up space, stopped shrinking for people who never understood the cost of my kindness. Now, Every time I get the rent notification on my phone, I smile. Not because of the money, but because it reminds me that no matter how late in life you reclaim your power, what belongs to you will always find its way home, especially when the home it is looking for was never really lost to begin with. What do you think about my story? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family loyalty and self-respect? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about resilience and second chances. Also, check out my other video about how to protect yourself legally when helping adult children. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching.